So for today, we're going to cover effective teaching techniques. We're going to focus primarily on creating and giving entertaining lectures. This is something that's highly subjective, and of course, these are just sort of tips and techniques to help you along the way. In terms of what to put on your materials for students to see, as well as how to act in the classroom. We've already covered a lot of different techniques along the way when talking about designing your course and what makes a good teacher. So some of this is just sort of extra supplementary to what we've already discussed. So one thing I want to start out with talking about is slide decks. So we often call them just PowerPoint slides, even if we use other kinds of programs to design them. But today, the terminology we use is slide decks. So anytime you're talking about slides, PowerPoint slides, Keynote slides, we just refer to them as slide decks. And what should you include? Now, we've talked about before accessibility and making sure that the text that's on the slide is readable. And we do have to be considerate of things like color schemes. Sometimes, especially if you're teaching a class with a lot of students, you might have students that are sitting really far away from the projector, the screen, and may have difficulty seeing information on the slides. So if you provide slides to students so that they can see exactly what you're going through, then that makes it a little bit easier on them because then they can have it right in front of them. But when we talk about putting together slide decks. Now, not everybody likes to do this. However, it is kind of an expectation that students have of their professors, that they're going to be given some kind of materials. So if you're going to go with PowerPoint slides or different kinds of slide decks, you want to include all of the key points on the slide deck. I like to start out with an outline of the things that I'm going to teach for that day. You could even start out with learning objectives, something to demonstrate, what are the key things that I want you to learn either today or from this topic or both of those. You get to choose how much information you put on the slide, and I always say that less is more. So when you put a lot of text on the slides, students are trying to do two things at once. They're trying to read all of your slides, and this is the same thing as any kind of presentation. You're sitting and you're reading the slides and you're not listening to the person who's lecturing. And I often have students come to me and ask me, what is the best strategy for me and for me to succeed in your class? If you're reading or if you have, a PowerPoint slide up and there's a couple sentences on it, I'm reading that and I'm not listening to you. So I typically tell students, well, you should review the slides before class so that way you have an idea what's on them. But I do try to include very little text so that students can write their own notes on the slides. And the point is to, have some key point, like right here, less is more, and then go into that detail, right? So you don't have to sit and give me a bunch of bullet points about why less is more. You can write less is more, and now you've read that and can focus on what I'm talking about. If you want to use more text, if this is, for example, an online class and all they have are the PowerPoints, you can use the notes feature in PowerPoint or any other kind of slide deck to give them extra material on top of that slide. So maybe you just have the key points and then they need to go to the notes part of the slide to then see more specific supplementary information that goes along with that. When we're teaching online classes, whether it's asynchronous or synchronous, you want to make sure that you're giving them plenty of material to study. And if you're doing online lecturing and you're giving them the slide decks, you may want to have more notes in there for them to read as they're sort of pausing the video and going on. Another thing too, and I think this is really key that a lot of people just don't think about, use diverse pictures. So I think that sometimes we get kind of stuck into the same sort of picture theme. Try to really expand, trying to find people that don't look like you. Try to find people who are in different kinds of situations. If you're going to use stock images, just really think about being diverse in those different images to make people feel more represented. because that's always good to think about inclusivity in your presentations. So you have lots of choices. This is just a few. A few that I use that I really enjoy. So obviously PowerPoint. This is what this one is done is with PowerPoint. Keynote. If you have a Mac, I've done Keynote, and there's a lot of really great features with Keynote that you can use where you can actually put a video embedded in the PowerPoint as a sort of a lecture video of you going over the slides. You can actually do this live. There's some really, really neat features of Keynote that you can use. And PowerPoint also has some really great features. For example, the design ideas, and Keynote has something similar where you basically you go ahead and you put everything on the slide and then you click the design ideas button at the top, and it will then give you some ideas for making your slides more aesthetically pleasing. It will actually give you some picture ideas. It'll give you some icon ideas. That's nice to kind of lay it out. So for example, this was using design ideas. It actually picked out all of these icons based off of the keywords that that I put in. So putting the word picture automatically got me a camera. Doing key points got me somebody that looks like they're lecturing on a board. So it's a really neat way to spice your slides up and give some more variety. Slide Egg is one of those things that's it's a website. It's a free site where you can download templates. If you're tired of the options in PowerPoint or in Keynote, you can go with that as well. And that's a nice kind of way to spice up your presentations. Also, USC, the marketing site does have USC specific slideshows, and those have all of our logos in our branding that's appropriate for the brand on there as well with all the colors. Now, one thing that you might be familiar with, I'm not sure, is Canva. So Canva has been known to be like the app to use for graphical design. So if you want to make a flyer or if you want to design some kind of sort of infographic, Canva is amazing for that. But they also have some really great templates for slides, for slide decks. And you can even, so there's one really great template. So let's say this is the slide, and then they can actually put like a little round graphic here, and you can put yourself in here and actually talk about the slides, and it will run the slides as you go. It's a really, really neat feature. I love Canva. They have some really great templates on there. Very nicely done, very artistic. They do have a lot of artists come and make different designs on their work. Really, really nice stuff. But Canva does have some really fun features. There is a pay version of Canva, so if you want to use certain graphics, you do have to pay to subscribe to them or to have a subscription to them. But there are a lot of free features that make it totally worth checking out if you're interested in that. Now, when it comes to what you give your students, of course, any one of these can be converted to a PDF or converted to an outline. Some people don't like to give their students every bit of what they do in terms of PowerPoints. They like to give them sort of an outlined version without all of the points on there, so it's just the main slides. Other people will just give their students a full slide decks with notes and everything. You can convert it to PDF if you're worried that students are going to sort of take your intellectual property. Totally up to you how you want to do it. Another thing too is that most of the publishers you'll find use PowerPoint, and if you adopt a particular textbook, it may come with just tons and tons of slides for each chapter. And the idea is that it gives you all this information, and you kind of whittle it down to what you want to use for your particular class. But these are really nice to start out with. Usually they have logos on them, like on the bottom, they'll have the logo of the textbook. So, it's obvious that it comes from the publisher and it is publisher content. But you can use that as a starting point, especially if you're prepping a new class, to say, oh, I like this information. They've already consolidated it into slides. Let me take this a step further and put it in a different template or change it up a bit. But again, students do have expectations that they're going to be given something, whether it's handouts or PDF outlines, slides, something. If you don't give them anything, right, and you are lecturing and you are using your own slides, remember that they will do things like take pictures of the slides. They will, and if you don't want them to take pictures of the slides, then you have to tell them, hey, you're not allowed to take pictures of my slides. They will then need time to copy down the material that they see up on the slides. So if you don't provide them with anything to go from, then they're going to stop you and have you wait until they're done copying down the material. So just kind of a heads up that students do expect to have something in hand, whatever that might be. Now, when it comes to different techniques that you can use to just be a better lecturer in general, so some things to consider is providing students with a framework. I've talked about this before, about starting out with an outline. At the beginning saying something like, these are the 3 to 5 main points that we are going to cover for this lecture today. And then doing that for every lecture. Beginning each lecture with some kind of exercise or like a high level question where you say, okay, we're going to approach this with the material that we're going to cover during this lecture, to give them kind of an idea of what you're going to be talking about. Giving them some kind of deliverable. We talk about sort of deliverables, like something in hand, a handout, or some graphic that they can use to help them remember what they learned that day. And, attention is limited. You're going to have to help students figure out and understand what they need to focus on. So, for example, in my Intro to Neuroscience class, I have a lot of pictures and diagrams, and I might say to them, this is something that you'll want to come back to and look at after lecture. This is something that you're going to want to study because it consolidates all the information that we just covered in this lecture. So giving them direction and guidance on what's important and what's not. And it'll help relieve some of that. Is this going to be on the test questions, which you might find yourself hearing all the time. So being explicit about what they should focus on is very, very helpful. Try not to overload the student, right? So don't give them too many types of materials to look at once. This goes for heavy text on the slide while also, explaining something. If you give them too much stimulation, then they're not sure what they need to be paying attention to. What's important here is pausing, right? Giving them a chance to ask a question, to take a note, to process the information that you're giving them. So short breaks throughout for them to just kind of be like, okay, does anybody have any questions? Starting your lecture out, does anybody have any questions from last time? Can we move forward? Some even suggest to do like formal activities every sort of block of time. So maybe every 20 minutes, kind of pausing, maybe doing a recap, doing some kind of like a poll question to see where everybody's at. Just to kind of get an understanding of where people where students feel like, are they getting the material or not? So if you give them too much to look at at once, too much stimulation, students can get frustrated because they're not really sure what they should be paying attention to. So if you're giving like a handout, but also explaining something, and then you also have slides up, just remember to make sure that you are careful about, over sensory stimulation. And then finally here, be familiar, right? Be familiar, use familiar information, use examples from student life. What do you think students are going to respond to? I gave an example today in my Intro to Neuroscience class about autonomous cells. And so we talked about going to a party, and I said, okay, imagine going to a friend's party, and everybody who arrives, they're the ones who set things up, and they don't need instructions from other people because they're the ones setting things up. But oh no, we need drinks, and we need napkins, and we need plates. Well, so then the people at the party start calling people on their way and say, hey, you need to bring napkins, or you need to bring drinks, or whatever you might be. And so I was explaining the difference between autonomous cells that differentiate into specialized cells, and then cells that differentiate based off of who's present and what's going on in that environment. And so I said those cells that are migrating to the party, they get direction based off of the need of the party. And if the party needs drinks, then they're going to turn into drinks, right? That's what they differentiate to. So just kind of using a silly little example, and students actually really responded well to it. They loved the example that they felt like they could relate to. and they can now remember this better later on. You can use, current events, pop culture. I love this kind of meme here, of just like, use funny pop culture references. A SpongeBob reference. Students tend to really like SpongeBob memes and other memes that they've seen before. And so, using this in moderation is really, really helpful because it helps you connect to your students. You can also, students generate their own examples. So say, okay, have you ever experienced this or seen somebody that experienced this? And so using examples that are applicable to the student, to their life, to what they're living right now. Also linking old information to new information. So maybe you covered something in a previous lecture that you can link to today's lecture. Maybe you can link something that they learned in an introductory class to what they're learning today. So being able to pull information together, making things relevant, and familiar to students. And then finally, doing something that is related to real world application. So remember we talked about, in a lot of cases, we are sort of helping students guide into the careers that they're going to go into and the skills that they're going to develop. And so thinking about how students can use this in the real world and even use this today, use this to make their life better. These are always really helpful. Students tend to perk up when they think, oh, I'm going to use this later for myself. For example, when I go over sleep hygiene and I tell people, oh, this is how you can get better sleep, people tend to perk up because it's relevant to what they're experiencing. The final thing I want to just talk about is the balance, right? A balance is one of the hardest things to do, in life in general. But when it comes to teaching, we want to be funny, but not too funny, because you don't want the whole thing to be a shtick. You want students to relate to you. You want them to find your information entertaining, but also not a joke, right? We want to be serious, but also we want to be flexible enough where students see that we are relatable, right? And again, we want to be relatable, but not too relatable. You don't want to give out too much information in your life, and you don't want them to feel like students, like you're not best friends, but they can trust you and you can have a safe environment for learning, but also they should respect you as an expert. Being expressive, that's also really important. So, using body language, but obviously not going overboard. Using different tones and inflections to demonstrate meaning. These are all things that are going to grab attention. There's times where I find my class kind of getting a little glazed over, and then so maybe we need to take a quick break, and we all need to do something silly that's going to bring us kind of back. And then part of that is also being expressive and changing my tone and saying, okay guys, let's take a different direction here. And I think that that's helpful. And then of course, one of the biggest things that we see students relate to is just being knowledgeable. And I didn't put not too knowledgeable here, but there is a balance. Okay, so you can come off as very knowledgeable, but if you tend to go in the wrong direction too many times, so if you get a question and you get sort of off the beaten path and you start going down way complex things that are irrelevant, or stuff that just not applicable to what you're teaching, students can feel like, okay, we need to get back on track. We're not covering the material that we were promised. So being knowledgeable is excellent and expected, and that's something that you get rated on in your reviews as a teacher, as a professor. But of course, we want to make sure that we stay focused on the material that we're covering. So that's just kind of a roundabout, sort of holistic view about some effective teaching strategies, moving all the way from, of course, how you present the material to kind of how you act in the classroom. So looking forward to a good discussion on this